What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. Today's episode, I have Dorge back with me, and we're talking to Tyler Terry. Tyler is from Arizona. He is an MIT grad. This dude is an absolute genius and does a really good job communicating really technical ideas to the average bow hunter like myself. I really enjoyed this podcast. We talk about a ton of things. We talk about arrow clocking. We talk about string manufacturing. We talk about arrow setups. Some of the arrow setup conversations might make some people a little bit upset. So just a fair warning, stick around. You're going to want to hear what he has to say. And we get into a little bit about my bow setup. And I'm right now ordering 80% let off mods for my Matthews V3X, previously shooting 85% mods. And in this episode, you'll hear why I'm making that switch. Before we get all the way into the episode, I do have a couple quick things to note. This weekend, Mobile Hunters Expo, Exodus is going to be exhibiting there. So if you want to come check out the new Exodus MMT arrows, or you want to check out some cameras, get some cameras out, Winchester, Ohio, Mobile Hunters Expo. It's going to be a really great event. You can catch us there. Jace, Lucas, and Jared are going to be down there talking deer hunting, talking arrows, talking cameras. So make sure you guys swing by the booth and check us out. We also have Velvet Fest going on. It's the official start to deer season, and it's a really exciting time of year to be scouting, getting your bow set up ready, getting your equipment ready, everything that has to do with getting started for deer hunting. Right now is the time to do that. It's a really exciting time for us here at Exodus. And because of that, we are offering some really great savings on the website. 20% off any multiple Exodus render order or Exodus render bundle order using the code VelvetFest. So head to the website, exodusoutdoorgear.com, put 2 or more renders or render bundles in your cart, use the code VelvetFest, and you will save 20% on that purchase. Along with that, any order this entire month through the first few weeks in August, every purchase is going to come with a Velvet Fest scratch-off card, and every card is a winner. So you're going to have additional savings available to you because we're really excited about deer season right here on the horizon. With all that stuff being said, guys, thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast, episode number 41, and let's talk to Tyler Terry. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. Today, I have Dorge back with me, and we have a new guest with us. We have Mr. Tyler Terry. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to have you here, Dorge. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. Glad to have you both.
Did you have a good vacation?
I did. I caught everything. I mean, we're talking, I don't know what you guys know. I'm a bigger fisherman than I was a hunter. I mean, you're talking a guy who spent over $100,000 on rods. I mean, it's not unusual. I dropped $3,000 on a fishing reel.
When Dorge does
I know
something, he
but
does
I
it all
have
the
to
way.
modify. I modify most of it. But we don't go in that because I can easily spend 20 hours just talking about a reel.
Well, Tyler, before we get into anything today, give everyone listening here a little background about yourself.
So I started in archery when I was real young, like 6, 7 years old. Started mostly hunting. I grew up in like the only archery only county in the state of Texas for a long time. So if I wanted to hunt as a kiddo, it was going to be with a bow, and that's what kind of got me started with my family. And then I started shooting competitive as I got into high school, things of that nature. And then one thing led to another. I went to college, joined the military, and then went back to college after the military. And I worked on things that were going to help me with the stuff that I like to do, make those things better. So, from a mechanical engineering standpoint and a physics standpoint, those were the things I felt like I needed to focus on to be able to, take my equipment to the next level, because I've always been a tinkerer, right? So I like to make stuff myself, build things with my hands, stuff like that. So it was the root of launching kind of my career in archery, was based on trying to modify and tinker with my own stuff early on. I spent some time in school, working in a wind tunnel, and things of that nature. And I learned a lot of things that just seemed to kind of make me scratch my head. Like me and Dorge have talked before. I'm like, why why is it made this way when it's clearly not the best way to do it? I mean, if you really think about things, even down to, you know, how points are shaped these days on the front of arrows and things of that nature, something that is really fine pointed is really not the best case scenario for archery stuff, but all of our points are super sharp on the end, right? So it's just funny when you really learn um, how to make things better. It's amazing. You can build quite a mechanical advantage into your setup if you do it smart, right? So, but the problem is um, there's not a lot of really great information out there pertaining to the real scientific part of it. There's a lot of just, hey, I've done it this way for 20 years and it works, so that's what I'm going to do with it, right? So, and this industry is very much so perception is reality. So I believe it works, so it works, right? But there's a better way to do a lot of this stuff, and um, I believe it starts with education. It starts with putting the information out there, giving people some hard results, and you know, helping that lead to being successful. Because what's going to grow our industry is helping people be more successful with it. If you're, doing something and it's not hard to be good at it, or you see immediate success, that makes you want to continue to do it. And it's going to make you want to, bring other people into it, because if it's fun for you, you want it to be fun for all the people around you, right? So if we can do a better job at helping people be successful with good information, I think it's going to help everybody across the board. So that's kind of my mission here with some of this stuff, is to take some of the knowledge that I've gained, from my education and stuff like that, and just time spent tinkering and behind the bow, and because that's been the majority of my career, is just you know tinkering, developing, working on things. I mean, I've got boxes and boxes of stuff here at the shop that are just you know creations of my own that led to either it was a complete disaster, and that but I was able to take away things from that, right, and be able to implement it into something else moving forward, or from an experience I had on a project that maybe did great or failed. It helps me with people that come through the door like, oh, hey, this is kind of what I think's going on. I'm like, oh, I've had that happen before, so then it's easier for me to lead you in a good direction. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. How did you and Dorge connect?
Actually, I had watched some, and years ago at one of the tournaments. I think it was he maybe come to the Texas ASA back when it was in Paris, Texas, like around one of the first ones, like 2008 or nine maybe. And I showed up and I saw some of his stuff, and I was like, man, that's really good, like his fletching jig and stuff like that. And I'm always, I'm a I like go fast stuff too, right? So like race car stuff, Harleys, all that kind of stuff, fast boats. I was always into that kind of stuff. And to me, he had like race looking stuff, but for archery. You know what I mean? I don't even know if that makes sense, but it was like high tech. It was real precise. Like it was things that made sense to me. I was like, and over the years, I've got bits and pieces of it here and there. And then a couple years ago, I reached out to him about becoming a dealer, because I was a manufacturer as far as strings go, but then I had a bunch more people coming to me actually wanting to buy product, because I was building a lot of bows and doing a lot of custom work for people. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to reach out to the companies that I really trust and believe in, and get on board and become a partner with those people, to where I can do the best work I can for customer base. And I reached out to Dorge then, and we got to talking, and basically would sit and nerd out for like 2 or 3 hours on stuff, and it really, I've learned a lot, from conversation with George, that kind of instilled, some things that I was thinking anyways. And he was able to explain it to me, from a scientific standpoint and it made things make sense, really. So we kind of hit it off. And initially it was reaching out to become a dealer, to be able to sell his product and be able to use his equipment to build, arrows and stuff like that for my customers.
Sure. Yeah. So today, real quick, I want to dive into kind of an experience I had, which led you and I to talking. Dorge connected us. We were doing some high-speed testing, and we are selling arrows engineered by Firenock, the Exodus MMT arrows, and it's all Dorge's design. And the main thing we wanted to see was the rotations. So we had a high-speed camera. We're shooting an Aerovane 2, and we're like, okay, these arrows are going to rotate to the right downrange, and they're going to rotate like way faster than any of the other arrows we're going to test. And when we started shooting them, we weren't seeing what we thought we would see initially. And we're like, okay, what is going on here? So we're like, well, let's clock these arrows and see what they want to do. And we clocked the arrows, and we did like 10, 12, 15 different arrows. And there was like 10 of the 15 or 12 of the 15 wanted to clock to the left initially. And then we had 3 random arrows that wanted to clock to the right. And we were like, well, we need this to change. And then I knew from talking to a previous string builder and talked to Dorge about this, that there was something going on with the string that makes it want to rotate a certain way. And I had zero education on this. You hear all the myths about like, well, if you're a left-handed shooter, your arrow is going to rotate to the left. If you're a right-handed shooter, it's going to go to the right. And I've had like Olympic trained archers tell me this. And I'm like, wait a second. I just talked to Dorge, and Dorge told me it's the way the center serving is, and then it's the way the string is. So he connected me with you, and we kind of figured out what was going on there. So let's talk about what makes an arrow clock a certain way at the initial launch point.
I want to be specific on this. We are talking an arrow that's launched between, say, 150 feet per second all the way to around 315, okay? Anything beyond that, what we talk about is not really applicable, because as you see, Dave Murray did a high-speed test at 380 feet per second and 425 and 450. The results are very different. So let's stick with vertical bow stuff, because the moment you pass 315, aerodynamic kicks in 100%, change everything. Tyler, go for it. You are the expert in this arena. You are the de facto string builder expert.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is even the material that we get from like BCY or Bloodline or whoever is put together, and the individual strands you get off the spool are put together clockwise, right? So majority of us build a bowstring in a clockwise manner. That string is twisted clockwise, your serving goes on the same direction and all that. So, and a lot of this has to do with your center serving and the knock fit as well. So, and it seems the tighter your serving is, the more rotation it imparts on the bowstring as well. So what you end up finding out is the majority of the string makers out there smartly build a bowstring clockwise, because that's the way the material is designed to be put together. So to get the stability you need and all that stuff, that's how you build it. Well, in turn, that lets go of an arrow basically, and it starts to spin it to the left. So pretty much every bow you pick up off the shelf these days is going to turn an arrow to the left. And the funny part is about 90% of the things that are out there in archery are designed to go to the right. So it's kind of funny. There's a lot of broadheads that are designed to turn right. There's most fletches, especially if you buy like a pre-fletched arrow from almost anyone, they're a 2-degree offset to the right or a little bit of right helical. And the funny part is all the bows and bowstrings are turning arrows to the left. So, it's kind of funny, but it all has to do with the serving tension, and some of it, the serving diameter, how it's on there, all changes the rate of rotation. But it has to do with the direction that everything is put together. So it's kind of funny. You put the bowstring together clockwise, but it turns it the opposite direction. So, if we could get string material built counterclockwise, where we could put a stable bowstring together counterclockwise, we could get a natural right rotation that would go along with most of the archery products that are available. So, it's a direct correlation with the direction that things are twisted on a bowstring will change the direction that the arrow leaves the bow. So that was a long answer for something that's simple.
No, yeah, that's good. Explain though what happens if you do have the counterclockwise twist. If say you're shooting a right beveled broadhead and someone's like, I need this thing to turn to the right no matter what are you going to be dealing with your string?
So you can build one that way, and I sent you a couple that way, and I kind of pre-warned you guys like, hey man, you're going to have some peep rotation issues, and this is not going to be super stable. So what ends up happening is the material ends up wanting to like unravel itself. So even though we built it the other direction to initially try to turn the arrow to the right, the material itself is not designed to be twisted that way. So the entire time the string is working against itself and it's wanting to unravel. And the amazing part is even like if you pull, take it out of the package and you take the paper clip off and you let go of it, it'll start to unwind. And everything's going the direction it should be, but the problem is the material itself is made to go to go clockwise. So when you build one counterclockwise, it's working against itself the whole time. So you're going to see crazy peep rotation and some instability there that you wouldn't see if we were to put one together correctly. So you run into some issues. So the root of the thing would be is if we could have material built and designed to go that direction, then we could build something super stable that's going to give you a good performing bowstring, but is also going to turn an arrow the correct way. Like I said, we can get one to go the other direction, but you're going to run into some headaches. It creates other problems that are more costly and dramatic than just having an arrow stall out of the bow before it starts its rotation.
Yeah, that was, I'm going to lead into that too, but there was also one other thing I wanted to bring to the light here is when you have a string that is rotated counterclockwise and then if the serving doesn't marry that, you said you get some type of rubber band effect. Explain that.
You get some okay. So if your string, let's say we put together the string clockwise, but I put the serving on counterclockwise, it's going to unwind itself almost immediately. Because at that point, as you're putting the serving on, especially if you put the serving on tight, it's going to unwind it as you put it on. So you're going to get a string that does some crazy stuff. It will not perform at all. I mean, technically it's going to hold the bow together, but that's it. I mean, that's about what you get out of it, right? So, I mean, unless your peep's tied in really good, it's going to fly out because the string is going to actually come apart during the shot process and then come back together and come apart, come back together. So you're going to see some crazy stuff happen when you do that. And I mean, there's some string builders out there, if they're getting started or whatever, that will build a few of them that way. Normally it's on accident, right? It's not like a purpose built thing. If it is purpose built, you need to reevaluate your string building, but you definitely run into some issues, and generally you'll see it rotate a ton one direction and then it'll start and come back the other way maybe once or twice before you actually get it to full draw. So initially it's going to try to unwind itself really bad.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So let's talk about this stalling. This is something that I've been like I can't wrap my head around it. And it's something I need to hear probably Dorge explain, and then Tyler, you can explain as well. So when you have that initial clock to the left, and let's just use ArrowVane 2 for the purpose of this video or this podcast, the ArrowVane 2 is designed with airfoil that is going to rotate the arrow to the right eventually, but it's going to start off the bow to the left. That stalling effect that you see happen, what is that doing to the efficiency of the arrow? Is there a loss there? There has to be something, right?
Absolutely. But you see, you need to understand that when right on the get-go, we start talking about bow that is from, say, something like 100 something feet per second all the way to about 315, okay? The reason I want to mention that because at that moment, aerodynamic is not your dominant factor. As you can imagine, most vertical bow, you're not going to reach that 315 magic mark. So in other words, aerodynamic is not a really big factor, but the arrow recovery is. Okay, I'm going to throw in arrow recovery because this is one of the most important thing, and which is the reason with modern compound bow, and then it defined as any bow that was made up of 2014 and is say 75 or 80% or more. The biggest issue at this moment is not the inefficiency of the stalling, but as you can imagine, if you shoot more video on some of the bows that's heavy FOC thin diameter, actually how the arrow shaft itself behave. In other words, the crosswind signature of the shaft is a bigger effect than stalling. Because at that moment, the initial launch of the aerodynamic, which is quote unquote the drag factor, is the biggest. And in the case of Aerowing 2, you find out that because we haven't reached a high speed, so another high speed of what an airfoil would take place. But at the same time, we're looking at there's a certain efficiency on it. You can see that difference between, say, the MMT arrow or the aero concept arrow compared to a normal arrow. First of all, you see the arrow flap out like crazy, especially if you're shooting something like say, about 15% FOC arrow with a 166. You find the tail of the arrow at that moment is not stalling, but the tail of the arrow flipping close to about 11 to 12 inches in the span. But at that moment, what's stalling? I mean, you already got a parachute to start with. But see, at the same time, the reason the stalling is pretty much what happens when you launch it. The arrow itself, because of you need to think about the surfing very much like a baseball pitcher grabbing the ball, and somebody just put a curveball on it. Yes, that's the reason the arrow turned left to start with. But see, as it go forward, the reason it stalled because the air is going through the arrow vein. The airfoil is taking effect. It wanted to turn right, but just like if you slam the car to reverse when you're going forward, the car going to go backwards and stall before it might go forward, stall before it go backwards. That's exactly the same effect. But the thing is that the amount of chaos, yes, the word chaos is used in the first 15 to 18 yards if you shoot a 246, and then you go into about 20 yards if you do a 204 or 23 yard in the 166. That's where all the chaos happened. So based on, I did quite a bit of testing with Tony Warden. We built 280 something arrows, and then we went through the DARPA radar system. And based on our initial test, we haven't go finish yet because we screwed up on the DARPA radar. I just cannot believe it. Our radar didn't work for a while, and it took me freaking a while to figure out, just for fun of it. You know what caused the DARPA radar to fail? Our headphone. We put on a freaking wireless headphone and it killed the DARPA radar. So we have to redo the test because we just got some tests and then we lost it. We got some tests and we lost it. I said, what's going on? And finally, we sent the whole thing to lab radar, and then it come back to us. He said, well, there's nothing wrong with it. So the technician went with every single thing we did. It was working perfect 4 or 5 times. So we finished testing. Then we put the headphone on with the video camera, and the thing stopped working. So what we believe that is the Sennheiser headphone have the same radio frequency as what the Derr radar used. That's the reason the whole thing just go haywire. Well, anyway, what we from the initial, I haven't got absolute solid numbers, so I would just give you what my guesstimate is. You're looking at about 2 to 3% on stalling at 100 yards. So yes, is that an efficiency loss? I will tell you, the efficiency loss compared to efficiency gain just from moving from a simple shaft to arrow concept, that alone in the first 30 yards, that's about 8 to 12% difference. The stalling itself is about, I would say, if you're pushing maybe 3% at 100 yards. So I really consider nothing. So in other words, the arrow recovery is bigger than aerodynamics at under 315.
Sure,
now,
that makes
sense.
sense.
Will totally change when you move on because you're slamming the rotation of the arrow, stall it, and then regain it. But remember, all these are happening simultaneously. Remember, there's four things happening. First of all, you got a torsion of the shaft, which most people didn't recognize. Because when you compress a normal build arrow, even like your MMT, which is based on my a sport weave, it got torsion in it. The torsion can be left to right. It really doesn't matter because when you compress it, the entire arrow shaft will compress and torque. The second portion, you also have to deal with the fact is that the surfing is forcing the arrow. It's a mechanical device, okay? It's just like the torsion of the shaft. Then you also have talking about the front of the arrow holding its position while the tail is flapping. See how many things going on? And finally, we also have to think about how the broadhead of fuel point itself impact on the shaft. So these 4 main factors all come together, which makes stalling a reasonably minor of this whole thing. especially when you look at 1 or 2 or maybe even pushing 3% at 100 yards. But if you shoot a deer at 30-yard in that speed range, that really is not a factor. To be frank with you, your shaft recovery is the dominant factor. And that's the reason we make arrow concepts so good. Because it's just like so many people who have not seen anything and I try to show them, but in some way, I'm not very good at doing that. I'm theoretically I'm good, but in order to explain, I mean, Cameron, I have to give you and the team Exodus extreme credit. You guys explain a lot of things I did so much better. I thank you for that.
Well, we thank you for giving us the opportunity. Tyler, do you have anything to add to that or anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if, like Dorge said, if you see a 2 or 3% max because of an arrow stalling, and efficiency loss, most of us are never going to be able to shoot that. When if you got a robot shooting this thing in a completely clean environment, in a wind tunnel, okay, maybe it's measurable, maybe, because we're talking about, it's being fired by a bow that's going to have its own inconsistency, right? So it may have a 2 or 3% efficiency loss per shot to shot, right? So the thing is that's almost unmeasurable when you add the human element, right? And something else that add to even to what Dorge was saying is how the arrow is being launched, what it does in the first few feet of flight is important, especially if you got like a fixed blade broadhead or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The less oscillation and the less paradox you can get out of it, the better it's going to be, right? The less chance of having a planing issue, the less chance of anything like that. So, another way you can combat that is not worrying about what direction it's turning initially so much, but maybe even think about, the let off on your bow, right? So a lot of things that people, a factor that people don't plug into when they're figuring arrow performance all the time is how the energy is being put into the arrow, right? So nowadays, like he was saying, a lot of the newer stuff, almost all of it, with the exception of a couple companies, still make an option where you can be 60 to 70% let off, which even though it's maybe less comfortable for us to shoot it initially, it's way better for your tuning, your bow, your arrow, everything. So if you can manage that, I would say 100% shoot the lowest let off bow you can manage. Okay. You're just going to have less headaches, period. And you're going to see an efficiency change, and you're going to see, trajectory change just from that alone. If you had 2 bows that were identical, same poundage, same everything, one of them was 90% let off and one of them was 65. At 100 yards, the 65% let off bow will shoot a foot higher than the one that's 90% let off. And that's because of how it puts the energy in the arrow. The arrow is going to have less oscillation through flight. So there's going to be less time of elliptical axis of rotation, right? So every time that arrow bends, we've got an energy loss, right? So the smoother transition we can put energy into the arrow, the less initial paradox we're going to have off the bow. So, because when you have a bow that has like 90% let off, say it's 70 pounds, 90% let off, how, and this is going to be, I'll try to make this, but, initially it comes out of the dwell zone and then it has an almost vertical climb into the power stroke, right? Where if you have one, let's say a 60 or 65% let off, it's a lot smoother transition into the power stroke. So how it delivers the energy to the arrow is a huge factor in figuring performance, because there's so many people out there nowadays that try to figure arrow ballistics like they would a bullet. They're not comparable. You can't just, all the guys on the internet, you look at them, they're like, oh, well, it weighs this much, it's going this fast, that means it has this much energy. That's 100% false, because there's a lot of factors that you're leaving out. Okay, bullets don't flex in the air like an arrow does. Bullets don't have a aspect ratio of wall thickness to diameter. All those things go into what is going to make the arrow perform well or not. So, it's being able to but it's hard to get people to understand that little bit, right? And it's because there's, it's not just a speed versus weight gives me X, right? There's a whole lot of other factors that go into what creates or energy loss or gain in aeroflight. I mean, it's not going to gain anything, but you get what I'm saying. There's
in efficiency percentage.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot more that goes into it. I mean, really, I've got guys, the big thing now is micro diameter arrows and guys shooting 80 pounds and all this stuff. And it's just, that's out of a 90% let off bow. That's just a recipe for disaster. People have tons of tuning issues with them and all this stuff. And then they're wanting to run 200 grain broadheads on a 166 arrow at 75 pounds with 85% let off. Good luck.
That's Chad.
You know what I'm saying? So, if you want to shoot 80 pounds and a 200 grain broadhead, then you need to shoot like a gold tip, X cutter or something, like a 25, exactly. like a big ass carbon arrow, right? Something with a thin wall that's going to react really fast and going to maintain its shape and start spinning on a single axis really quick. That's what you're going to have to make that thing really dial in and shoot well. You're not going to do it with a micro diameter arrow. It's not going to happen. Could you make it shoot okay at 20 yards? Sure. At 60 yards? No. You're going to have problems.
That you explained that really, really well. So thank you for that. The let off thing there is like, that's got to be one of those things that you look at and be like, why are bow manufacturers doing this? Why are they?
Because everybody love it. Because it makes you feel better.
It's an easy button. It's the way to not have to work at shooting your bow, because you can draw it back the 4 times you're going to do it when you get it out of the case before deer season and hope that everything's good, and it's not hard for you to keep it full draw.
Sure.
So it's taking the work out of archery, but the problem is it creates a whole nother set of issues. Sure, you can hold it at full draw for 5 minutes. It'll damn near hold itself at full draw, but it creates so many other problems with accuracy and tuning and things of that nature. It's hopefully, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend. People are coming back to a little longer, more stable bows, and even kind of giving us the option to go back to more holding weight, even in a hunting bow. I mean, to this day, I still, my hunting bow's got like 22 pounds of holding weight. People are like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't I? It works.
The stability, the consistency, the efficiency, the long range.
I don't have to be so on point, right? So here's something to think about. If I've got a bow that has 7 pounds of holding weight at full draw, that means that I can literally take the string apart, put my finger in it while the bow's at full draw. There's no tension on the string almost. So anything I do in hand position, facial pressure, if I shaved off my mustache and then my lip was touching the bowstring versus just a few hairs, like that sounds stupid, but it's that minor, right? It's going to affect aeroflight. Where if I have a bow that's got 20 pounds of holding weight, there's a dramatic amount of more tension on the bowstring. So anything that I do that is not perfect is less affected. It affects the arrow way less. So I don't have to be a machine to shoot that thing well, where if you've got a 90% let off bow, you do. I mean, and the thing is, and people are like, well, I don't know, I had a bow 15 years ago and I just shot it great. I'm like, you're right. Probably did. Probably had 60% let off, and you're shooting a larger diameter arrow. I mean, it turns out people weren't so stupid back then. We actually made really good stuff, right? Especially for what
right.
And we've kind of gone the opposite direction. So
actually, it's like that time, we got ACCs, we got aluminum arrows. People don't understand the actuality. Besides the durability of aluminum arrows is one of the easiest freaking tuned arrow you can possibly get, because you got a freaking linear spine. Yep. The only thing about it is that you got memory issue. I mean, just like what I say, 75 shots, if you're using the spine correctly, the arrow is done for.
Yeah, aluminum arrows are hard to beat, man, especially when it just comes to consistency and accuracy. They're really as good as it gets. I mean,
especially those ACCs. I mean, that's the reason I say if you got one of those Eastern AC Super Slim, they only make 1 year. I mean, those are the freaking best arrow I have ever seen. I mean, I tested everything. I mean, to the point that I would say the AC Super Slim compared to my Arrow Weave 204 Light, they are pretty much on par.
Mm-hmm.
No, and that's a lot of credit for me to give an arrow that I didn't make.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the guy that won't make anything unless it's 50% better.
Yeah, that's the reason. But Eastern no longer make that. That's the reason I don't have to live on that because see, my current Arrow Weave 204 Light compared to Super Slim, if it exists, I would not be able to say my arrow is 50% better than anything out there.
Right.
I would say I would pretty much on par with it, which is I'm not happy about that.
Sure. Man, every time I have one of these conversations with someone that is an expert in this, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight because my setup is so wrong. Every time I'm like, oh my God, you're an idiot. So I'm shooting a Matthews V3X now, 70 pounds. And I'm like, oh man, I got an option for 80% let off, 85% let off. Let's go with the high let off, man. Let's go with the 85. So I bought the 85% let off cams. How big of a difference? So if I call my bow shop today, I'm like, hey man, I need 80% let off compared to 85%. Like, should I be losing sleep over this or no?
Well, I'll tell you this, just from a shooting standpoint, I mean, let alone what it'll do to benefit your arrow. You're going to aim the bow way better, probably. I mean, just because you got to think that's not a light bow, right? Like we don't make a lot of light bows these days. So the less, when you have less weight in your release hand, then that forces you to have to hold the bow in the air, right?
Sure.
There's not enough tension to actually have the bow support itself at full draw. So you're working actually harder holding the bow in the air than what you would be just holding the bow at full draw if you had lower let off, right? So you're not able to put, stabilizer weight on it the way you need to, or accessories on it the way that you need to begin with. Yes, you're going to be able to hold it full draw easier, but that brings on other problems. So not just the tuning, but even to a shootability standpoint, I think you will see the bow will naturally point better with the more hold weight. So I think it's a win all the way around.
Okay.
Even though it seems minor, the Matthews stuff tends to add weight a little better than some out there. So when you go from the 85 to the 80, you'll feel a few pounds difference, right? So say you're going to go from 9 pounds to 13 pounds. And that sounds like not a lot, right?
No, percentage-wise, it's huge. If you relook at it, you're talking a 33% increase in holding, which, of course, stabilizes your entire hold. Remember, you told me when you go to the new V3X, your shooting doesn't feel as good.
Yeah, I can't shoot it as good as my Triax. I can't.
The Triax is an 80% off, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you have a 30, I mean, you need to look at this scientifically, mathematically. You're looking at a 33% holding more. Just on a pure mechanical advantage, mechanical stabilization. That's a big number. We're not talking 25, it's 33.
Man. All right. Well, I guess I got to call my bow shop. This is the last time this year.
He's like, I really need to have this set up.
But think about, I mean, Cameron, I will give you credit. You said you are the guy who would admit what it is, and you actually shoot enough to recognize there's a difference. You know how many people will face problem like that and just think, oh, this is not as good a bow.
Oh, yeah. I figured it's not that. I figured it's got to be something.
No. You figure, but how many people will say, oh, no, I need to shoot a thinner shaft. I shoot a heavier weight. Yeah. That's what a lot of people did. Sure. They figured that, with my 90% off, the bow is not shooting right. Let me go and add 150 grain in the front, and see the arrow is pointing right at 30 yards.
Yeah.
No. Let me ask you. Tyler, you own a shop. How many people go that direction for the last 3 years?
Man, a lot of the folks that come in, I actually had a guy in a similar situation the other day shooting a Verdicts of all things, since we're on that. He had been shooting like Gold Tip XT hunters with 100 grain brass insert, 125 grain broadhead, and it was a 300 spine. And it was like a 28-inch arrow. So he was already under spine for the thing to begin with. And it was 85% let off and 75 pounds. So it was like compounding issues. And he was like, well, I just thought that, this is what everybody's doing. And I was like, so I got him a standard 246 arrow. We put a 13 grain aluminum insert in it and a 100 grain point with the same 300 spine arrow. And immediately it just wadded everything up. And a lot of that came from, a high let off, high efficiency bow does not equal let's shoot high SFOC. So, the direction, and here's why people like the Ranch Fairy think they're successful with their arrow build. It's because it's going so slow that it really doesn't matter what you do to it. When you take a bow that's designed to shoot wide open at 300 and say 40 feet a second, and you build an arrow that turns it into such a turd that it's going 230 feet a second, it really doesn't matter what you do to it. It's going to fly okay because it's going so slow. So the thing is, it's, and people are like, well, when you do that, you make the bow more efficient. Well, there's nothing efficient about a 220 foot a second arrow. Okay. Now, I would rather take an arrow half the weight almost at 300 feet a second that is very accurate, right? I'll kill everything I shoot at with that arrow. So, the thing is it's trying to, and I got guys that come in all the time, especially I'm out west. So I'm out here in Arizona. So, everybody hunts, a lot of the shots here. I mean, hell, the average shot is probably 50 yards, maybe further than that. Cause people are hunting coos deer and mule deer out in the desert, elk up in the mountains. So, it's a lot of long range stuff with a bow here. Right. So essentially you would think the idea would be, I'm going to build the most accurate setup I can build. Right. But because of poor information, people are still trying to build these like super heavy, super high FOC arrows because they think that's what's going to kill an elk out here.
Yeah. My
wife in 2015 shot a monster bull with a 364 grain, 500 spine axis arrow and a schwacker and shot through it with 54 pounds, a 54-pound bow. And it was a 41-yard shot. So tell me again why I need a 600 grain arrow and 80 pounds.
Yeah. This is, so I have a few things to mention here. This is something that we've been talking about a lot. Like as you dive into this and you kind of realize what's going on, and you have all these people talking about slug feet per second and how much kinetic energy you have. Well, you only need so much. I'm going to purely talk whitetail hunting here because the majority of people that listen to this are whitetail hunters. Mm-hmm. You need an X amount of slug feet per second to pass through a whitetail. After that, everything else, what's that do for you? Nothing, right? But right. You lost a whole bunch because you have all that excess. You lost a bunch of speed. Mm-hmm. So you got there much slower. So my goal with my arrow setup would be to reach X number of slug feet per second to pass through the whitetail and then get there as fast as possible. And I want to ask you guys your opinion on the efficiency mark where you talk about, well, a heavier arrow is going to be more efficient. It's going to have less velocity deprivation. I had Mark Hayes, the engineer of the Matthews that worked on the V3X. And I asked him about some of that. And I asked him what his arrow was, and he shoots a 370 grain arrow, and he likes that 5 pounds per pound of draw weight. So, or 5 grains per pound of draw weight. And he's like 370 feet or 370 grains. And I asked him about, like, okay, say you go on the high end of that, what happens? And like, what if you took the middle of the road and you're like, okay, I don't want to be super light and I don't want to be super heavy. What if you just went right somewhere in the middle? Like they call that the happy medium. He was telling me that's the worst possible thing you can do because you don't have the best of either worlds. You have the worst of both worlds. And he said that Matthews builds their bows to be the most efficient at IBO ratings. As they added weight to the arrow, the bow became less efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys seen that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because just to reach the draw cycle too. And not to mention, you need to understand the Matthew bow is just like every single bow. They were designed based on 70-pound, 30-inch draw. And just remember your draw weight. The moment you go beyond that, you lose a lot of efficiency of the mechanical property of the bow. At the same time, you also lose mechanical property from the arrow point of view. Now, that said, that's another thing. You say the heavier arrow is not 100% wrong for people who do a lot of pig hunting.
Sure.
Especially pig hunters. That's the reason, for them, just like Rick McKinney out of Carbon Tech, he would tell you, if you want to do a lot of pig hunting, the best arrow they have is the Lynx, the Rhino, and of course, on that too, I added a third one because I understand that what they really want to do. I added the 204 arrow weave. That's at 14.5 grain per inch. Now you can effectively build a very, very heavy arrow without heavy FOC. That is an efficient, high velocity, low velocity, high impact arrow. Remember, heavy arrow weight do not equal to heavy FOC. If you are building the arrow with a heavier shaft weight.
Sure.
Which also come into play. I know some of my dealers, like Tyler, is exploring. I mean, like Jerry Martin, out of Extreme Custom, he is expert in building super low heavyweight heavyweight arrow that's not FOC because he's building Arrow Concept 2.0, which means that they're adding an entire 6-inch tube on the back of the shaft. Right. I mean, I will leave that for another discussion because now I would dive into something too serious.
So the crazy thing is so here's the thing. So like the info, where the info that like what the Ranch Fury puts out is beneficial is in longbow and recurve archers. Mm-hmm. If you shoot a longbow or a recurve, what he's doing works awesome. It does. Works awesome. And, and I can't say that I've never shot high FOC arrows. I've shot like 19% FOC arrows, but they were super stiff and they were very light. Even with, 180 grain head and a 22 grain outsert, the entire arrow weighed 427 grains.
Yeah, that's light. So
it's not heavy, right? So I have a very light shaft, so I still have a lot of velocity. And the shaft recovered well. It's a ultra high modulus carbon shaft, so no issues. And I shot it well. I mean, even out to like 130 or 40 yards, it shoots really well because it's still fast and it still recovered really good, right? So, I've played with it, but where I see, the best trajectory, the fastest sight tape, places I can get the most bang for my buck, especially nowadays when my only option is to have a bow, that my best case scenario, I'm 75 or 80% let off on in most cases, is like under 12%. Mm-hmm. So, when I got guys that, and especially the 31-inch draw length, 80-pound guys, maybe under 10% for them, right? Sure. Because that system breaks an arrow down so hard that really you need it to be able to recover as rapidly as possible. So, I mean, ideally, he needs to shoot like a 300 diameter arrow with a light point and light insert. Yep. Or be able to run the Arrow Concept system in it and still run a light point and light insert.
Yep. Yeah, that's what he ended up changing. I remember, I'll never forget the conversation. Dorge calls Jake, and I'm in the car, and he's like, "Your friend Chad, he know nothing." and he's talking about because Chad was shooting an 80-pound bow at 30.5 inches, and he was shooting a 166 shaft with 125 grain head or something, and he was having a nightmare of a time. And that's exactly why we have the platform that we have now with the arrows, and Chad's personal experiences with the bad stuff has led us to this. And he switched his limbs to 70 pounds. The first arrows that Dorge built him were a 300 arrow with Arrow Concept 1.0, Aerovane 3, and he shot those with a 75 grain head, and they were like absolutely money. Like,
Yeah, like lasers, man. Yeah. And the thing is, guys got to understand, like that guy that's shooting 80 pounds and a 31-inch draw length, penetration is not your issue, right? You could shoot an animal with a blunt and you're probably going to get a pass through. Like,
right.
It's stupid. So worrying about shaft diameter is like, the problem is there's so much advertisement out there and there's so much information out there by a lot of the manufacturers. Really, that's where it starts. The education needs to start with the manufacturers, and they need to put good stuff out there. Quit trying to sell people a gimmick and start trying to sell people stuff that's going to help them be successful.
Right.
Okay. So, because here's the deal. If the industry wants to grow and do really well, let's help the people that want to be a part of it be successful. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give them some information and let's give them some training and some things that are going to be able to put it together. And I'm not saying you can't take some of these bows and make it work, right? Because there's going to be somebody out there that's like, well, I got 80 pounds and I shoot a 166 arrow and I make it work. You can make it work to a point. Is it ideal? No, 100% not. So,
swallow your pride.
There's a lot of people out there making stuff work, or they just don't know what they don't know and they don't realize it's wrong.
Right.
Maybe to them, it's working great, but in all reality, it's junk.
Yeah, that was me.
So, so the thing is it's not, that may be me sounding kind of rude saying that, but it's there's a lot of people that are victim of circumstance, right? They just don't know what they don't know. So that's the whole perception is reality. Well, it's working for me. Well, what are you doing with it? Are you shooting deer over a feeder at 20 yards? Hell, you make anything work, right? But are you trying to shoot a coos deer at 80 yards with a bow? Okay. Now, unless your stuff's pretty dialed, that's like a 3 out of 10 shot, right?
Oh yeah.
So, but if you've got a bow that's really dialed and it's very efficient, and you don't have issues with wind and things of that nature because you're shooting a gigantic vane or something on it, now your probability goes up, because you can build mechanical advantage into your bow that is so forgiving that say your efficiency now where you're really good is 40 yards. I'm super comfortable shooting 40 yards, right? With proper setup, you can stretch that to 60 or 80 yards based on your setup alone. Not that you're aiming the bow any different. Literally just in how forgiving you can build your setup, you can take that effective range and add a third or even 50% to it or more based on just the bow setup. Right? And a lot of people are missing that part, right? They're doing the Me Too stuff. Like, well, what do you shoot? Oh, I shoot a X whatever bow, and I'm shooting micro diameter arrows with a 100 grain, outsert and a 150 grain point. Oh, me too, right? It's the Me Too movement, man. So, people are afraid to be different, but I like being successful. So I'm very results driven. I really don't care much about anything other than being successful. So, if that means I shoot a 75 grain head and a 13 grain insert, then that's what I'm going to roll with. I'm not worried about if the arrow blows up when it hits a rock on the other side after a pass through. Like, that doesn't even register in my thought process.
Right.
Because as far as I'm concerned, that arrow did everything I needed it to do. So if I got to eat that $20, big deal.
Yep. I'll go buy another one that does the same exact thing.
Big deal. I'll blow every one of them up that I shoot at if that's the case.
Right.
Especially if it leads to the result that I want. Right.
Yep. 100%.
So
well said.
The people, the same guy that's complaining about, having to buy arrows after he shoots something with it, that same dude's also got a $6,000 long range rifle, and he has $10 a piece hand loads that you never get back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where's your thought process here? Right. You spend all this time working on something like that and very little time with your bow. I mean, there's a lot of good hunters out there, but have a poor idea of what success looks like because they're it's a bow, the pie plate at 20 yards is good enough. I mean, I come closer to thinking that about my target bow than I do my hunt bow. I spend way more time on my hunting bow making sure that's right than I will because I can get away with way more on a target setup than I mean, your arrows can fly out of your bow sideways on a target bow, and you can still hit what you're shooting at most of the time, right? You cannot do that with a hunt bow.
Right.
You're trying to fly.
No, when you got a broadhead,
you just can't do it.
Sure.
That broadhead on the end of it, and it doesn't matter even if it's mechanical. It is not the same shape or length as a normal field point. The further away that thing gets from the end of your arrow shaft, the worse things become, even if it's mechanical.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's hard to replicate that. So like a lot of times when I have people, when they talk to me about setting up their hunting bow or broadhead tuning and all that stuff, I'll tune their bow with them with their broadheads on it. Because you might get one shoots a perfect bullet hole through paper or something with a field point. You screw a broadhead on the end of it, even though it's the same weight and say it's a mechanical, doesn't matter. It will not shoot the same hole a lot of times. So, success starts from initial setup, right? So, think of it this way. Let's say baseball players. You know what the difference between a good baseball player and a professional baseball player? The professional baseball player has mastered fundamentals. The fundamental things that you have to do, they mastered those things. They didn't take some special pill. They don't know some super secret that makes them a pro. They mastered the fundamental stuff, the bare root basics. So to help someone really be successful from a hunting aspect with today's equipment, you've got to start initially from the ground up, and it has to do with setup, right? Let's get the setup right, and let's make sure the things that you're doing at that point are correct. So if you get your bow initially put together right, you got somebody that's competent, helps you tune all that stuff and get it dialed in, then you're not spending all your time working on your bow, you're spending your time shooting your bow.
Sure.
And that's the best time spent for an archer, right?
Yeah.
So, it's frustrating sometimes because people come in with all this information, because the internet is an amazing thing and it's crap all at the same time, right? Because anybody can just put anything anywhere.
Yep.
And there's a lot of folks that are like, well, I've seen it on the internet. It's got to be the truth, right? Then it comes down to I don't even want to call it like any celebrity hunter out, but so-and-so said this is how it works, and that's got to be the truth if they use it. I'm like, bro, they got a paycheck that told them to do that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, it's a business for a lot of people, right? Where a lot of this information is coming from. It's a business for them. They are paid to sell product.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the end of the day, that doesn't mean they're not paid to give you great information. They're paid to move product.
Yeah.
So they're given whatever marketing information they need to be able to get whoever fanboy to buy that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hate to be like that, but it's the truth. I mean, one thing is there needs to be some more truth in the industry. It's going to benefit us.
Yeah, I couldn't
You need to
agree
be
more.
truth everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, let me just with this point, I want to point out another thing that a lot of people miss, which I think Tyler will agree with me. When you start shooting a 90, 95, or 85% of bow, do you know how much more the demand on the shooter if you want to shoot long range?
Ooh, it's high.
Tyler just saw hitting the nail a few minutes ago. And a lot of people, they all of a sudden is shooting badly because they don't start with a good form to start with. I mean, if you're only shooting 20, 30 yard pie plate, but let me tell you a funny story. I hunt in JTA, Joliet Training Area. Every year in July, go there to do a yearly training, a really qualification. Do you know how many people average go there with a brand new bow? They put a broadhead on 20 yard, put 2 arrows out of 3 on a pie plate, then you qualified.
That's incredible.
Over 50% failed.
What
did that tell you?
I mean, you could almost do that with a slingshot.
Honestly.
I know. But when you go to JTA and look at the guy, I mean, I remember this vividly. When I first hunted JTA, the guy with a brand new Review 318i come up with a brand new bow case, pull out a brand new bow, and then he tried to shoot it, and the guy stopped him and say, "No, we only shoot few broadhead here." He shot 3 arrows, not one make the pie plate. One you don't even make the freaking 3x3 pay bear. That was the those are the MQ-32 days. So we're talking a little bit back there.
Oh yeah.
Those poor deer.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was like 2000 or something, right?
No, actually, there's a that will be 1997.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was 5 years old.
Well, I just tell you, I'm a very old guy. I've been hunting for a long time. I'm one of the guys who believes everything is.
Yeah. I might have made it to high school by then.
I have one. I need to circle like way back here. So I'm going back to arrow clocking and the result of. So we always talk about like, okay, well, if everyone does it this way, why is it built another way? And my question to Dorge when we were doing all this was, Dorge, if 90% of arrows come off the bow clocking to the left, why does arrow vane make your arrow go to the right? Dorge, why don't you answer that for me?
Very easy. You hunt with a broadhead. The broadhead got a right-hand screw. If you cock everything to the left, can you imagine you hit the arrow, the freaking broadhead unscrew from your arrow or your field point on every single shot? I mean, unless the whole industry from upside down, start from field point thread all the way onwards, it's pointless. I mean, if you do not shoot a broadhead that is not just glue on, yes. But how many broadhead you can buy that is not a screw on?
Not many.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, the only one I can remember are the musty glue on.
Thorn makes
the
one
only
now.
one, right?
Yeah,
but that's it. I mean, that means every single arrow. Because remember, the stalling and everything only happen about 3 to 5 feet. You don't shoot an animal at 3 to 5 feet. You will still go back to the right eventually, because every single thing is made that way. Because all the rest come in.
Sure.
But that changes. I mean, I also hit back into a lot of aerodynamics. The moment you hit into say the 315 and about like the 380, 420, you can see from Dave Murray's video, high-speed video, the arrow wing 2 and arrow wing 3 would turn within 2 inches in front of the crossbow. Because at that moment, aerodynamics is that big a factor. Remember, you got speed.
Yep. The
airfoil go over speed. Everything happened. I know most of the vertical guys don't really understand this, but imagine this. Don't have to imagine that. As a matter of fact, 10 point at the 505 to 150 feet was a crossbow. And you should see the effect of those. I mean, it gives you a whole different meaning of first dynamic band, ballistic coefficient, the aerodynamic trajectory coefficient. It gives you how the aerodynamics works and how many disasters broadhead you got.
Sure.
The broadhead is slightly not perfect and true. You're looking at 6 inch at 40 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're dealing with 515 to 525 feet per second.
Yeah.
At that moment, I mean, I think just like my conversation professor said, like, you imagine, the reason the Chinese new plane got us 2 side wing in the front, because it's so much more forgiving compared to our F-16, the F-15 in the front on the 2 side edge. Because they make the side edge is to give it stability, but they give you also maneuverability. See, this is what you mean. Maneuverability is not something you want in an arrow. You want it to go perfectly straight. But remember, the moment you change the aerodynamic and the broadhead and how you catch air, oil will break loose.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now you understand why I went through that extreme to build my broadhead identical in length, in height to a field point.
Yeah, right.
Because see, when somebody tells you fly like a field point, that's nothing called fly like a field point. It has to be like a field point. That's nothing called like.
Right.
Yeah. You got to, something to think about from like an aerodynamic perspective too. Even these days, even down to like target archery, right? There's a lot of target points out there that are very long and very pointed. Okay. So people immediately think because it looks sharp that it's going to go through the air better. But here's something that I want to put out there. So I don't know if you're familiar with like the land speed record, people that go to like the Bonneville Salt Flats, and they got those like Aeroliner, real long, skinny, like jet propelled vehicles that run like that break the sound barrier basically. And if you look at any of those vehicles, none of them have a pointed nose. They're round. They have a round nose. They're almost built like a torpedo, basically, right? It's not very sharp. It's round. So, like, if we were, to make an accurate, efficient target point, it really needs to be rounded on the nose, not very pointed on the nose, because when it's super pointed, it actually causes the air to bend almost 90 degrees off of it, right?
Exactly.
Instead of slipping through the air, it breaks the air and causes the air to actually come off of it this way. And it creates more issues, because if you ever seen a picture of a jet as it's breaking the sound barrier, you see all of the air and everything dispersing away from it, right? And that has to do with how it's going through the air. One that is rounded, let's say like a jumbo jet on the front, that's built for efficiency. Even down to air miles per gallon of fuel, all those things that go into that. That's an efficient design. So really the older, short, rounded field points are better.
Yes, absolutely. But that bring it back, because a lot of people ask me that exact same question, because I also race, but at the same time, we need to deal with the fact is that if you shoot ASA, IBO, the rounded point doesn't work. You do know why?
Because you get kicked out arrows. So yeah,
now
actually,
you know
I've got something to show you, and I was leading up to this. Let me grab some real quick. I'm going to show you something.
You see, that was where the problem is, because when we start shooting those tournaments, the most important is shoulder yourself into the target. All right, go ahead.
So here's the thing. So I've got some arrows built with the destroyer points from Firenock, and I've got these also. And literally, the only reason I shoot this, I don't know if you can see that very well.
Yep.
It's very long, very pointed, very hard. Is literally for glance out issues. Because if you're, a lot of these classes, you got a lot of archers that are really good. They're all shooting at a spot this big, and it'll get crowded really fast. You put a bunch of large diameter arrows in there, and then it eats up room really quick. So, unless you have something like this, you shoot one of those rounded, more blunt field points in there, and it could deflect your arrow off the target, like not just out of the scoring ring that you want, but like to a zero. So that's where this works really well. And the fact that you're only shooting out to 50 yards, you're not going to see the difference in this being blunt versus being pointed. So
that means if you're shooting on your own in the backyard and you want to save your target with the most efficient pool and so on, the freaking blunt point is the best. Yes. Why do I make a pointed point? Because can you imagine every single person that call me and say, Dorge, your point is not pointed. Is it really good? It happened on the very first time.
Yeah.
Just avoid that altogether.
Yep. Yeah. So at the end of the day, after all I said, I'm still going to shoot something like this at ASA targets and stuff, because it's going to get me the result that I need if I run into someone else's arrow. And Dorge's points, anytime you've got one that's long and the taper is gradual, it's going to have less of a kick out issue. But when it comes to pure efficiency and aerodynamics, it's not the best design.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm shooting a broadhead that doesn't have a super pointed tip, and it's funny, they did a lot of testing, and they were trying to determine how sharp the actual tip of the head should be. And as they sharpened that edge and made the angle a lot sharper, their penetration became less and less and less. And they'll have people do that. They'll call them, like, hey, your broadheads aren't very sharp out of the pack. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, the blades are sharp. And we're like, yeah, but the tip's not real sharp. And then those people would sharpen the tip of it, and they wouldn't penetrate as well. So it was like they found I don't know if they did it on purpose or what, but the tip of the head is not at a very sharp angle, and the tip itself is not sharp. And everyone they do the same thing. They get all these calls like, "Hey, these aren't sharp," and they're like,
Yep.
"Please do not sharpen them because you will have a worse result."
Mhm.
Well, just like Peterson Bonding did a review on my the dagger, and it was not very good because it's shooting through hard stuff. We're talking wood, plastic, steel, you name it. But we don't hunt those. We don't have steel plate season or plywood season. I
Yeah.
designed mine to kill and also reuse because you know how long it takes me to come up with a concept. You said if I build you a really, really good two blade, you know what the problem with the two blade is? You must be able to sharpen it, or else it's a one shot deal. Have you ever tried to sharpen, say, an iron wheel?
Have it.
It won't happen. It is what it is. When you finish with it, unless you send a factory, you're not going to get that arc. But you can close your eyes with the, say, Arkansas stone. You were able to sharpen a Firenock dagger with your eyes closed. That's how I design it. Because a lot of people don't understand when you want to design something to be usable, you need to explain the usable section, which is also why I insist on certified and trained dealer, because at least there is some guys out there know that I'm not pushing them. I'm going to listen and then convey the message to the customer.
Right. That's a
Which
big
is rough,
challenge to
man.
overcome. Yeah, that's a big challenge to overcome.
I mean, if you want to think, let's look back to like one of the most successful like broadhead point designs over the years. And this even goes into like bow fishing, shooting like gator gar that are hard, super hard, right? And like the original like muzzy trocar tip, that little chisel point tip, it's not super sharp. It's fat. It's but it will penetrate as good as anything there is. It'll go through bone as good as anything there is. That's why there's still a lot of broadheads these days that emulate that point design, because it works.
Yep.
Like that little triangle chisel point works really well, and it's not real pointed. It's not a steep or a very shallow blade angle. It's pretty steep. You know what I mean? So and you wouldn't think it would work well, but I remember as a kid when I first started bow hunting, I shot through everything with an old 90 grain 4-blade muzzy. I mean, shot through everything.
Yep.
Pigs, all kinds of crap. You know what I mean? I grew up in Texas shooting. We shot hundreds of them.
Yep.
And it's like, just never had an issue, and not with fast bows or nothing. I mean, hell, I think the first handful of deer I ever shot was with a 250 or 60 foot a second arrow.
Oh yeah.
So that design works good. That little short blunt design works really good.
Yep. Yeah, we've been going here for a little over an hour here, but man, this is one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done. So thank you for joining me. Is there anything here that you want to leave off? You've had some things that you're like, man, I need to get this out there. Is there anything else that you're like dying to get out there?
Oh man.
Terry mentioned about your shop. Your shop is new. I mean, nobody knows it, and you
moved
from Texas to Arizona. Man,
so
do some advertising.
So we moved. So originally I was just a manufacturer, and I did a technical school with Fulcrum Archery. We do like technical seminars, teach people how to work on their own bows, and we certify bow techs for shops and all kinds of stuff. Well, I recently moved all that to Safford, Arizona. So we're in Eastern Arizona now. And we decided to open a full pro shop and everything. So I'm not just doing custom builds anymore. We're a full-blown pro shop nowadays. So I'm currently waiting on product. We're stocking a bunch of stuff now. We're planning on having our grand opening here when I get back from Coleman around the 5th or 6th of August. So, but it ought to be good. There's tons. It amazed me. There is gobs of bow hunters out here and very few shops. So, hopefully we'll be able to help all the folks around here be a little more convenient, because they were driving 2 or 3 hours to bow shops and stuff. So, we're looking to educate as best we can. If people want it, if they don't, we're just going to set up their stuff the best we can. But if they want to learn and want to go a little deeper into their stuff, we're absolutely going to help them with it if we can. like I say, it's not everybody wants to hear it. So those that don't, we're just going to get you what you need. But those that do want to know, we'll help you.
That's really cool. Well, guys, make sure to go check that out. Dorge, thanks for doing this again. Thanks for setting us up. And until next time, we'll talk to you.
See you guys.
Have a good one.